There is a pattern humanity repeats like an old sea shanty. When the storm will not stop, when the crops fail, when disease creeps through the village like a thief with patience, someone becomes the explanation. Welcome aboard the Phantom Navigator. I am your cartographer of the quiet injustices, and tonight we chart a global map of accusation. Not folklore witches who fly for sport, not storybook villains, but real people. Named, tried, punished, remembered. We begin where smoke once curled around wooden rooftops. In 1692 in Salem, fear found paperwork. The afflicted girl screamed, doctors shrugged, ministers prayed, judges listened to invisible testimony. Spectral evidence was allowed. If someone claimed your spirit harms them, that counted. Imagine defending yourself against an accusation your body never committed. Tatuba, enslaved and vulnerable, confessed under pressure. Confession spread like spilled oil. Rebecca Nurse, elderly and respected, was hanged despite community petitions. Giles Corey was pressed beneath stone for refusing to plead. More weight, he reportedly said, and I believe that is also the case because of how his life tragically ended is what finally got the Salem witch trials noticed, and then they finally ended them for just it being cruel. Salem ended. The apologies arrived. The dead remain unavailable for comment, but Salem was not unique. It was a late echo of a much older panic. In Scotland, in 1590, the North Berwick witch trials began after storms battered ships carrying King James VI's bride home from Denmark. Weather became evidence. Agnes Sampson, a healer and midwife, was accused of conjuring those storms, tortured until she confessed. She described meetings with the devil and sea-bound sabotage. The king listened. He believed. When royalty fears the wind gains suspects. Thousands would be accused in Scotland over the next century and a half. Many were strangled and burned. In Germany, in the Holy Roman Empire, particularly in the regions of modern Germany, witch hunts escalated with terrifying efficiency during the 16th and 17th centuries. The Würzburg trials, and I apologize if I say that wrong, I'm not good at pronouncing German words. The Würzburg trials alone saw hundreds executed, including children. Children! Confessions named neighbors. Neighbors named relatives. The machinery fed itself. Judges believed they were cleansing their community. Theological certainty fused with civil authority. When belief and bureaucracy shake hands, gallows follow. In England, during the English Civil War, chaos loosened many structures. Into that vacuum stepped Matthew Hopkins, self-appointed witchfinder general. He traveled from town to town, charging fees to identify witches. Swimming tests were administered. The accused were bound and lowered into water. If they floated, they were guilty. If they sank, they were innocent but potentially deceased. It is a brutal riddle disguised as justice. Hopkins operated for only a few years, yet dozens were executed under his influence. Fear was profitable. In France, in the 17th century Paris, whispers of black masses and poisonings reached the court of Louis XIV. The affair of the poisons implicated fortune tellers, alleged witches, aristocrats, and servants. Executions followed, imprisonments too. It was not rural hysteria this time. It was elite scandal. Witchcraft accusations can travel comfortably in silk. In Italy, in parts of northern Italy, particularly in the 16th century, inquisitorial courts handled witchcraft cases with surprising variation. Some judges were skeptical, others were fervent. The Benedetti of Friuli, Friuli claimed they fought witches in dreamlike spiritual battles to protect crops. Instead of immediately burning them, inquisitors questioned, recorded, debated. Even within persecution, there were pockets of hesitation. History is rarely uniform in its cruelty. In Iceland, most of those executed for witchcraft were men. Magic in Icelandic culture was often associated with learned practice, grimoires, runes, spells, written rather than whispered. Accusations targeted men accused of wielding harmful sorcery. The stereotype fractures here. Witch hunts adapt to cultural expectations. In parts of West Africa, colonial legal systems collided with indigenous spiritual beliefs. Accusations of witchcraft could intertwine with local tensions and imported religious frameworks. While distinct from European witch trials, accusations still led to punishment, exile, and violence. The label changes shape, but the mechanism remains. Fear plus authority equals consequence. In certain rural regions of India, accusations of witch or dayan have persisted into modern centuries, often targeting widows of women who owned land. These accusations frequently mask disputes over property or power. When a woman stands alone economically, suspicion can bloom around her like smoke seeking oxygen. The word may differ, the structure feels familiar. In Japan, they have the foxes and possession. In Japan, belief in kitsune possession led to social ostracizations in certain periods. Families labeled as fox possessed could be isolated for generations. While not identical to European witch hunts, the social consequences could be severe. Reputation can become hereditary. Once named, always named. Across continents, centuries, languages, religions, one pattern emerges. Accusations often surface during instability, war, famine, disease, economic uncertainty, religious upheaval. The accused often share traits marginalized, independent, economically inconvenient, socially different, politically vulnerable. And the systems involved often believe themselves righteous. That is the unsettling part. Most participants did not see themselves as villains. They believed they were protecting their communities. History shows us how sincerely wrong people can be. To be accused of witchcraft was to be socially erased before execution ever arrived. Neighbors avoided you. Family members hesitated to defend you. Your name became shorthand for danger. Even acquittal could leave scars. In some regions, families of the accused carry stigma for generations. Reputation outlives rope. The Enlightenment introduced skepticism. Courts required stronger evidence. Torture declined. Religious authority shifted. Formal pardons have been issued in places like Scotland and Massachusetts centuries later. Symbolic justice. It matters, but it's not resurrection. As our ship continues, as our ship completes its orbit of accusation, what lingers is not broomsticks, it's paperwork, it's testimony, it's a fragile architecture of justice when fear seeps into the beams. Witch hunts are not relics of ignorance alone. They are reminders of what happens when explanation outruns evidence, when certainty outruns compassion, when community chooses blame over ambiguity. Tonight, we honor the unnamed across continents, the midwives, the healers, the farmers, the stubborn, the inconvenient, the misunderstood. They were not storms, they were caught in them. There is something about a hill. From the top, you can see everything. From below, it watches you. Tonight, we climb two of them. In 1612, beneath the broadening rise of Pendle Hill, accusations began with a curse. A young girl named Alison Device encountered a traveling peddler, John Law. After he refused her request for pins, he collapsed shortly after. Whether from stroke or stress, no one could say, but in a world primed for suspicion, coincidence is a luxury. Alison confessed to bewitching him, and that confession opened a door. The Pendle witch trials unfolded in Lancaster, sweeping up two rival families, the Devices and the Ch- Chettoxes. Poverty, grudges, and generational bitterness fermented into testimony. Among the accused was Elizabeth Southerns, known as Old Demd Demdike. Elderly, poor, a local healer, she died in prison before trial. 9 others were hanged. What makes Pendle especially chilling is the survival of detailed court records. We can read the testimonies. We can see how neighbors spoke about neighbors, how children testified against mothers. One of the most damning witnesses was Jeanette Device, a child who testified against her own family. Her word carried legal weight. Imagine being condemned by your daughter's voice. Pendle was not chaos, it was structured. Witnesses, depositions, judges in robes, the law functioning exactly as designed. That's what makes it echo. If I remember correctly, I actually looked into the Pendle Hill witch trials before. And Allison, the reason why she was accused is, yes, whatever she was trying to buy, he denied. I know they say pins, that's what I think it is, but they think it was something because she never said what she wanted to use them for, but the pins that she was after was also linked to being used in witchcraft there. So he thought there's a possibility she might be trying to do that. So John declined and he was walking off. She cursed him, saying, I hope something bad happens to you. And then his health got bad. I think after that they said he had like a stroke, which is a big coincidence. But that timing, it was just the timing of when it happened. She felt so bad that she said that to him right before he went down, that she when he was starting to feel better, she went to go apologize and said, "I'm so sorry I yelled at you that I wanted something bad to happen to you. I didn't think it would." They took that as a confession, and they took that as, "You put a spell on him, and now his health is suffering." So that started this thing, and if I believe also correctly, the two families that were accusing each other were natural healers. They both were natural healers, and they both were like each other's biggest competition. So the biggest way to get rid of your competition then was basically accuse them of witchcraft. That does it for you. Unfortunately, it just kind of went back and forth between the two families. If I remember correctly, I'm going to have to sit down and talk to someone. One thing I have realized living in Japan is Japanese and American Google will tell me two different things, and it's crazy. So I would love to talk to someone in over there in England to kind of educate me better on what actually happened, if that is true or if it's just one of those I found it on the internet in the United States and that's what I was coming up with. That's why I also love doing this. I would love to know more, so definitely see what their take is on it. If you know or have any thoughts or opinions, reach out. You can message me on my pages. You can also email the Phantom Navigator podcast at gmail.com. I would love to hear people's opinions. If Pendle was a flare, Würzburg was a furnace. Between 1626 and 1631, during the 30 Years' War, the Prince Bishopric of Würzburg experienced one of the largest witch hunts in European history. Under Prince Bishop Philip Adolf von Urenberg, executions multiplied. Hundreds were accused. We are not speaking only of elderly women in cottages. Children are executed, students, priests, city council members, even relatives of officials. At one point, the accusations reached so high into civic leadership that the administration itself began hollowing out. The Würzburg trials were systematic. Torture extracted confessions. Confessions named accomplices. Lists expanded. Entire social networks were swallowed. Letters from the time described prisons so full that space ran out. Special buildings were constructed to house the accused. Imagine a town where the baker, the teacher, the choir boy, and the mayor might all disappear within months. The Würzburg witch trials did not remove individuals, they destabilized the region. Skilled workers vanished, governance fractured. Fear consumed its own foundation, and then, gradually, it burned out. Political pressure mounted. Skept- skepticism crept in. The executions stopped, but the demographic scar remained. Place Pendle Hill beside Würzburg. Different languages, different politics, different landscapes, the same architecture of panic. A triggered event, confession under pressure, authority legitimizing fear, community participation, escalation. And Pendle, rivalry and poverty played their part. In Würzburg War and religious tension poured fuel on the fire. The 30 Years' War devastated Central Europe. Famine diseased armies, carving through towns. In that atmosphere, misfortune demanded supernatural explanation. The worse reality became, the more aggressively people searched for invisible saboteurs. It is a terrible irony. The more unstable the world, the more confidently communities insisted they understood its cause. Pendle reminds us of something unsettling. Children are not merely collateral, they were participants. Janet Device's testimony in 1612 helped convince her mother, sister, and brother. Years later, during a second wave of Pendle accusations in 1634, Janet herself was accused of witchcraft. The machinery does not protect its operators forever. In Würzburg, children as young as 9 were executed. What does it do to a society when childhood becomes evidence? When innocence becomes accusation? Today, Pendle Hill is a hiking destination, quiet, windswept, climate with cameras and sandwiches. Würzburg is known for its Baroque architecture and vineyards. Visitors admire the Würzburg residence, sip wine, and wander streets once shadowed by processions and execution sites. Life continues, cities rebrand, hills remain, but beneath the beauty lies sediment, layers of names once spoken in courtrooms, heavy with dread. Add Pendle, add Würzburg, add Salem, add Scotland's coastal storms and France's court intrigues. The geography changes, the script repeats, accusations bloom during crisis, authority codifies suspicion, confession multiplies it, communities fracture, and afterward, centuries later, apologies at attempts to tidy what cannot be restored. Japan did not experience witch hunts on the scale of Würzburg or Salem, but belief in spirit possession and harmful sorcery shaped real consequences. Fox possession. Kitsune Suki or fox possession created generational stigma. Families believed to be fox families could find marriages refused, businesses avoided, reputations permanently shadowed. No formal mass execution system like Europe, but social exile can be its own sentence. Communities sometimes ostracized entire bloodlines. The accusation could linger for decades. The crime was not casting spells, it was being labeled. In the Edo period, accusations of spirit possessions sometimes intersected with criminal investigations. When illness or strange behavior appeared, exorcists were called. Confessions could be spiritual rather than legal. If someone admitted harboring a fox spirit, that admission could alter their standing permanently. The punishment was not always fire, it was erasure. Now we shift slightly. In 1637, the Shimabara Rebellion erupted in Kyushu. While primarily peasants revolt fueled by taxation and Christian persecution, accusations of sorcery and hearsay were woven into the crackdown. Christian Christian converts were tortured, executed, forced to trample sacred images to prove loyalty. Not witches technically, but the structure is familiar. Religious deviation framed as existential threat. Now, if you don't know, Japan is basically made up of a bunch of different islands. Kyushu Island happens to be the island that I am currently living on. It's where I lived for the last like just over 3 years. And I have heard about this. I guess it was really bad too. So I have kind of heard about that. Especially cuz here in Kyushu Island is where they started trading with Denmark. We actually have a whole theme park kind of dedicated to that kind of town. It kind of looks like that kind of town, like different museums in it, basically. They call it a theme park, but it's not. There's not a lot of rides. It's basically a lot of cool things you can walk in and explore. It's called Host and Bosch. If you're curious, Italy presents a fascinating contrast. The Roman Inquisition often handled with witchcraft cases with more restraint than secular courts elsewhere in Europe. Not always, but often. In the 16th century, in the Friuli region of northern Italy, a group known as Bonadante claims they left their bodies in spirit form to battle witches and protect crops. They describe night journeys, spiritual combat, agricultural guardianship. Instead of immediately Instead of immediate execution, inquisitors interrogated them repeatedly. Over time, the church reframed their visions as diabolical. Some were imprisoned, some recanted. The Benedate were not burned and massive, but their spiritual identity was slowly dismantled under pressure, a quieter extinguishing. In the Alpine region of Val Camonica during the 16th century, dozens were executed for witchcraft. Here, locals were harsher. Torture was used. Confessions multiplied. Italy was not uniform. In some regions, skepticism slowed the fire. In others, it fed it. Giordano Bruno. Now, not a witch, but a reminder of how deviation could end. George Giordano Bruno was executed in 16th century in the 1600s in Rome for heresy. His cosmological ideas and theological positions threatened orthodoxy. He was burned, not for broomsticks, for ideas. Italy persecutions often centered more on heresy than witchcraft alone. The machinery of control operated on belief systems broadly defined. Japan shows us social persecution rooted in spiritual belief and possession. Italy shows us inquisitorial control, sometimes restrained, sometimes ruthless. Neither mirrors Würzburg exactly, but both demonstrates how fear of invisible forces can reshape lives. What fascinates me about Japan especially is how accusation could become hereditary. A family marked as fox-possessed might carry that stain for generations. And it's not just a fox spirit, but there's also Japan also has a dog spirit, Inugami, and they believed if so a family would have like their own Imagami, and if they thought you had one, you were exiled from the city and you had to live outside you had to live out your house had to be outside the little perimeter of their town. And they just no one wanted to marry into that family. No one wanted to marry into like that at all because that's just how it is if you were accused, you gotta move out of town. In Europe, execution ended the matter brutally. In Japan, stigma could linger quietly. In Italy, interrogation could erode identity before fire ever appeared. Different methods, same human instincts. When uncertainty rises, someone becomes explanation. The witch is not always a woman with herbs. Sometimes she is a peasant Christian in Kyushu, sometimes a fox-possessed daughter in a rural village, sometimes a visionary farmer in Friuli, sometimes a philosopher staring at stars. Sometimes she is simply inconvenient to authority. And across continents, the pattern whispers. Fear seeks structure, authority provides it. Communities participate. Japan and Italy remind us that persecution does not always need bonfires to leave scars. Sometimes it only needs a label. One of the most unnerving features of the trials was the use of spectral evidence. If someone testified that your spirit appeared to them and attacked them, that counted in court. No physical proof required. Your invisible twin could apparently freeload into someone's bedroom and commit felonies. Later, even some ministers began to doubt this logic. Increase Mather famously argued it was better than 10 suspected witches escape than one innocent person being condemned. A radical thought, apparently. Bridget Bishop Bridget Bishop was the first person hanged. She had already been accused of witchcraft years earlier and acquitted. She ran taverns, wore bold clothing, had multiple marriages. Translation for Puritan Massachusetts? Suspicious. Her past reputation made her an easier target when hysteria erupted. In Salem, history could be resubmitted as evidence. The girls and young women who accused others were rarely punished after the trials collapsed. Some married, had families, and lived long lives. One of the most prominent accusers, Ann Putnam Jr., later publicly apologized in 1706, saying she had been deluded by Satan. That apology did not reopen gallows. Several accused individuals owned valuable land. When someone was convicted, their property could be seized. Families were sometimes left financially devastated. In communities where farmland meant survival, accusations could conveniently rearrange ownership. A curse can be profitable. There was a grim calculus in Salem. Confess to witchcraft and accuse others, and you might avoid execution. Maintain innocence, and you are more likely to hang. This is why Giles Corey refusal to plead mattered. By not entering a plea, he prevented the court from legally confiscating his estate, protecting his heirs. Even under crushing stones, he was negotiating this system. So yeah, that's one of the reasons why they believe that he did not he absolutely refused no matter what they did to him. He refused to falsely he refused to admit that he did any witchcraft to end the suffering because he knew if he did that they are using it to take his land from his family, which is not what he wanted. He'd rather go through crushing stones than have his land taken from his family. There was Salem town and Salem village. The village was more agrarian, more conservative, and often resentful of the town's commercial prosperity. Many historians note that accusers and accused often fell along factional lines tied to church disputes and local politics. This was not random lightning. It followed fault lines already present. The Court of Oyer and Terminer was created specifically to handle the witchcraft cases. When Governor William Phillip's own wife was whispered about a possible witch, the court was dissolved. Interesting how skepticism blossoms when it reaches the governor's doorstep. Despite the common imagery, none of the Salem victims were burned at the stake. They were all hanged. Burning was more common in parts of Europe. Salem preferred rope. Less theatrical, just a final. At first, the accused were socially vulnerable individuals. Then respected citizens were named, wealthy merchants, even relatives of officials. When accusations reached too high up the social ladder, confidence in the process faltered. The hysteria collapsed under its own ambition. Massachusetts began reversing convictions in the early 1700s, but full exoneration of all victims did not occur until 2001. 3 centuries historically moves slowly when admitting fault. History moves slowly when admitting fault. One theory suggests ergo poisoning caused by fungus contamination rye may have contribute, contributed to the girl's convulsions and hallucinations. The evidence is debated. Some scholars find it plausible, others dismiss it. What matters most is this: whether illness, manipulation, fear, or a combination of all three. Once the narrative of witchcraft took hold, it became more powerful than any single cause. About a quarter of the accused were men. Witchcraft in Salem was not exclusively female, though women were the majority. The label was elastic enough to stretch. By late 1692, public executions were no longer spectacles of certainty. Doubt crept in. Clergy urged caution. Letters criticized proceedings. Hysteria can ignite quickly. It can also cool abruptly once credibility cracks. Perhaps the most interesting fact of all this is the Salem witch trials were not inevitable. They required belief, they required authority, they required participation. Remove one of those pillars and the gallows stand unused. Salem was not a story about witches. It was a story about what happens when suspicion outruns restraint. And that is far more unsettling than broomsticks. Before the hangings began, there was Sarah Good. Homeless, pregnant, poor, she begged door to door. If someone refused her charity and misfortune followed, it became evidence. She maintained her innocence in the end. Her infant daughter, Dorcas Good, was also accused. Dorcas was 4 years old. She spent months in jail, shackled, alone. She reportedly confessed after pressure and later suffered long-term psychological damage. 4 years old. History rarely lingers on her. In 1692, Mary Easty was accused, released, then accused again after her accusers claimed her spectre returned. Before her execution, she petitioned the court not for her own life, but that no more innocent blood be shed. It was a plea to reform, not mercy. Her calm dignity disturbed even some supporters of the trials. She was hanged anyways. Philip English, a wealthy merchant, was accused along with his wife. They escaped from jail and fled to New York. Money, mobility, and connections helped. Many poorer accused had no such option. After the hysteria ended, Philip English returned and later sought compensation. Salem's panic was not evenly distributed. There was also a dog that was executed. Yes, A dog was shot because it was suspected of being used by a witch or even being a witch in disguise. When hysteria spreads, species lines blur. The dog could not testify. When whispers brushed near the wife of Governor William Phillips, skepticism bloomed overnight. Shortly after the court of Oyer and Terminer was dissolved, it seemed it seems proximity to power can cool supernatural certainty. Roger Toothaker was accused of witchcraft and died in prison before trial. He was a physician. His son later accused others. The cycle did not pause for mourning. Remember Janet Device from Pendle? Salem had its own variations. One of the accusers, Mercy Short, had previously been a victim of a Native American raid and suffered trauma. Later, she displayed similar afflictions to the original girls. Some ministers began suspecting fraud. The accusers were not immune to suspicion. When performance wavers, the crowd shifts. Salem Village had deep internal conflict over Reverend Samuel Parris. Some families supported him, others resented his leadership and salary demands. Many of the accusers came from pro Paris families. Many accused came from anti Paris factions. The trials mapped neatly into existing social fractures. Witchcraft may have been the language. The argument was older. Accused witches paid for their own imprisonment. Chains cost extra. Food cost extra. Even after acquittal, prisoners had to pay jailers' fees before release. Innocence was expensive. Some families were financially ruined even when their loved ones survived. One method used was the touch test. If the afflicted person stopped convulsing when touched by the accused, it was taken as proof of guilt. Think about the theater of that. Crowded room, trembling child, silent suspect, a hand placed on a shoulder. If the shaking stops, you're doomed. If it continues, the devil is stronger. Either way, the script is written. Increase Mather and other grew increasingly critical of spectral evidence. There was internal debate. The community was not monolithic. Monolithic. Salem's story is more complicated than mob frenzy. It was a legal argument, theological dispute, political tension, personal grudges, trauma, illness, and fear braided together. The last person executed was Martha Corey in September 1692. She had criticized the validity of the accusations before being accused herself. Doubt, it seems, was suspicious. After her execution, the appetite of death began to wane. One of the least discussed realities is this. Many accusations began with children and teenagers. Adults validated them. Courts formalize them. Communities enforce them. Hysteria requires endorsement. And perhaps the most unsettling fact of all, no one at that time thought they were participating in a historical embarrassment. They believed they were doing something necessary. That is what makes Salem linger, not the broomsticks, the paperwork, the signatures, the calm, procedural certainty of it all. Not every witch panic became Würzburg. Some were brief, contained, almost surgical, which somehow made them colder. In Ireland, the Island Maggie case in 1711, the village of Island Maggie in County Antrim, 8 women were accused of bewitching a young girl named Mary Dunbar. No mass hysteria, no sweeping purge, just 8. The girl's fits resembles those in Salem. Decades earlier, convulsions, trances, claims of spectral torment. The women were convicted and pilloried, not executed. It was the Latch witch trial in Ireland. The restraint feels almost accidental, as if the fever tried to ignite and failed. A spark without wildfire. In Sweden, the Gavle boy in 1675, during the broader Swedish witch panic known as the Great Noise, a young boy, Gavle, admitted he had lied about witches abducting children to a mythical place called Blackula. He had fabricated this story. Authorities executed several people before doubt surfaced. When the lie unraveled, the hysteria began collapsing. Imagine being the child who watched executions unfold from a story you invented. Truth sometimes arrives late and trembling. Italy's inquisitorial system often dampened mass hysteria, but singular accusations still surfaced. In Modena, 1519, the case of Chiara Signorini was accused of casting love spells and using folk magic to influence relationships. Not a village purge, just one woman. She was interrogated, pressured to confess to pact making with the devil, and ultimately punished. The record survived in fragments. A single life reduced to parchment. What stands out is how love magic, something woven into local folklore, could be reframed as a diabolical conspiracy once filtered through inquisitorial suspicion. Affection became Affection becomes heresy. Tiara late echoes. When the larger Tiara witch trials of the late 1500s are known, smaller, later accusations linger in the region for decades. One widow accused after a livestock epidemic years after the main trials ended faced imprisonment though not execution. The fear never fully evaporated. It settled into the soil and waited for new misfortune. Venice, the fortune teller of 1587. In Venice, a woman known for divination and herbal remedies was brought before the Inquisition in 1587. Her crime was not harming livestock or summoning storms. It was offering predictive services to elite clients. She was reprimanded, possibly imprisoned briefly, and banned from practicing. No fire, no spectacle, just quiet professional extinction. In Italy, witchcraft accusations often slid sideways into charges of superstition or fraud, handled bureaucratically. Periodically. A career ended instead of a life. Still kind of erasure. Japan's cases are often rarely framed as witch trials, but spirit accusation could alter lives permanently. In an Edo era village, a young bride was accused of kitsune tsuki after erratic behaviors and seizures. Instead of execution, exorcists were summoned. When her condition persisted, her husband's family annulled the marriage and returned her to her parents. The family became labeled as Fox affiliated. Marriage prospects for siblings diminished. No courtroom, just social exile. The punishment stretched beyond her body into her bloodline. Blind female shamans known as Itako acted as spirit mediums in northern Japan. While often respected, some were accused of manipulating grieving families or harboring malevolent spirits. In isolated cases, local authorities restricted their practice of exiled them from villages. Not execution, reputation dismantled, spiritual authority revoked. In rural northern Honshu, during the late Edo period, a farmer accused a neighbor of fox possession after livestock repeatedly was found unalive. Village mediation followed. The accused woman underwent ritual purification and was socially monitored for years. No legal punishment, but every misfortune thereafter circled back to her name. Living probation under invisible suspicion. Large trials are storms, micro trials are drafts. They reveal the mechanics of miniature, one illness, one accusation, one confession extracted, one reputation altered forever. No need for mass gallows, just enough authority and belief to tip one life off balance. Italy shows us bureaucracy containment. Japan shows us social containment. Northern Europe shows Northern Europe shows us late flickers of larger fires. Different systems, same fragile equations. Misfortune plus imagination filtered through fear. What fascinates me about these smaller cases is how easily they disappeared. No monuments, no tourism, no collective memory, just ink fading in archives. A woman in Medina, a bride in Edo, 8 women in Islamaji, a boy in Sweden who spoke too vividly. History remembered History remembers infernos, but lives were also undone in whispers. As we lower anchor tonight, the smoke thins, but it never fully clears. We have sailed past Salem, stood beneath Pendle Hill, and felt the furnace heat of Würzburg without ever striking a match. We have watched fox spirits slip through Japanese villages and inquisitors in Italy sharpen their questions like knives that never quite look like knives. And here is what lingers. Most of the accused were not powerful, they were available. Witch hunts do not require witches, they require fear with paperwork. They require neighbors willing to nod. They require someone to say, yes, that sounds right, when absolutely does not. The rope was real. The flames are real. The accusations were often made of fog. History is littered with people who were guilty of being inconvenient at the wrong time. Some were too outspoken, some were too quiet. Some too skilled with herbs, some too skilled with ideas. Some simply stood where panic needed a silhouette. And maybe the most unsettling truth of it all? Most of the people who signed the warrants believed they were doing the right thing. There is no villain twirling a mustache in most of these stories, just certainty. And certainty, when it skips evidence, can be lethal. So as you step off this ship tonight, lanterns in hand, remember, if the wind howls for a culprit, it does not mean you owe it one. If a crowd leans for confession, silence can be a rebellion. And if someone points a trembling finger, ask who benefits from the shaking. Because sometimes the scariest spell ever cast is a rumor repeated twice. This has been the Phantom Navigator, where we chart the waters between truth and terror, and refuse to build bonfires just because the night feels cold. Sleep well, trust carefully, and if anyone calls you a witch, at least insist on better evidence than bad dreams. Until our next voyage.